In the winter of 1830, fear spread across the Bathurst district. Settlers locked their doors before sunset. Stockmen travelled armed, and mounted police searched the countryside for a gang of escaped convicts who declared open defiance against colonial authority. They became known as the Ribbon Boys. Led by a young English convict named Ralph Entwistle, they robbed isolated farms, stole horses and firearms, and for several weeks put one of Australia's newest settlements on edge. Today, their story has largely faded from memory, but nearly 2 centuries ago, it became one of the most dramatic convict uprisings in colonial New South Wales. Ralph Entwistle was born near Bolton, a mill town in Lancashire, England, in 1805. He worked as a brickmaker, but like many struggling labourers of the time, found himself on the wrong side of the law. Convicted of stealing clothing, he was sentenced to transportation for life. In 1827, at just 22 years of age, he boarded the ship John I, along with 189 other convicts, destined for the penal colony of New South Wales. Like thousands before him, he left England in chains, with little chance of ever returning home. After arriving in the colony, Antwistle was assigned to John Liscombe, Bathurst's first stock and station agent. Liscombe himself arrived as a free settler only a few years earlier and managed his grazing property, Stowford, in the Fitzgerald Valley, while also serving as Bathurst's police clerk. By all accounts, Antwistle proved himself a capable worker. This was enormous country compared to where he grew up, wild, untamed and seemingly stretching forever. The new settlement of Bathurst was barely 10 years old, made up of little more than a small cluster of government buildings and huts near the river. About 20 kilometres southwest was Liscombe's sheep station. Open grazing land where Antwistle worked the vast property as a bullock driver and appeared to be settling into the realities of station life. Ordinarily, if an assigned convict could stick it out for 12 to 14 years, with good behaviour, a ticket of leave would be heading their way. In the Bathurst region at the time, that ticket could come much sooner, or so men like Antwistle were led to believe. Nothing suggested that within 3 years he'd become one of the colony's most wanted men. The turning point came during the summer of 1829. Antwistle was under the impression that his ticket of leave was soon to be issued. He and one other convict were entrusted by their master, Liscombe, to take a bullock dray loaded with wool over the Blue Mountains to the Sydney markets. There they'd sell the wool and pick up supplies for the station before returning. In Antwistle's eyes, this task was one that would prove him worthy of that ticket of leave. This November was hot, and they knew their multi-day journey would be a tough one. Along the road outside Bathurst, they were joined by 2 other convicts set with the same task: sell wool at the markets for their master. They'd been on the road for a good chunk of the day, and come sunset, they'd reached the river outside of town. Before setting up camp for the night and making supper, the men couldn't resist that cool river water. Off came their kit and in they went. As they enjoyed cooling off after a stinking hot day, they heard voices and the clatter of hoofs. They frantically ducked behind the rushes as it wasn't just some landowner passing by. It was the much disliked Governor Ralph Darling and his entourage, along with his coterie from Bathurst about to cross the river. The cavalcade passed by seemingly not even noticing the naked men in the river, but someone else apparently did. Thomas Evenden, Bathurst's police magistrate and superintendent, who'd ridden out to greet the governor to escort him to town. Antwistle and the others remained in the rushes, but the cavalcade, along with Evenden, continued to ride away. The coast was clear. The men got out of the water, dressed and set up camp. As their dinner was underway, who should turn up out of the darkness but constables on horseback, sent out by Evenden. All the men were arrested, charged with causing an affront to the governor, and the wool they were transporting was confiscated. The men were tried before Superintendent Evenden the following day, then publicly flogged with 50 lashes each. Evenden had a reputation for bullying assigned farmhands, as did his overseer, John Greenwood. It didn't help that Antwistle's master could easily have vouched for him the moment it happened, given his position in the Bathurst court. But he did nothing for such a trivial offence. Antwistle had no choice but to return to Liscombe's sheep station, and any hope of him earning his ticket of leave was taken away. Whether this incident alone drove Antwistle towards rebellion is impossible to know, but from this point onwards, his life took a very different course. In late 1830, Antwistle absconded from Liscombe's property and disappeared into the bush with a growing number of runaway convicts. Many of the men were Irish, and their leader, Ralph Entwistle, was reported to wear a profusion of white streamers about his head. Many believe the idea may have been borrowed from the Irish secret society known as the Ribbon Men, using the ribbon as a symbol of identity and quiet defiance against colonial authority. Before long, newspapers had given them a name: the Ribbon Boys. At first, their raids were opportunistic: food, horses, firearms and ammunition, anything needed to survive beyond the reach of the authorities. As their confidence grew, so did their numbers. Some convicts joined willingly, while others were persuaded that life in the bush offered better prospects than life under assignment. Then the rebellion crossed a line from which there could be no return. The gang targeted police magistrate Thomas Evenden's Bartlett's property, near present-day Wimbledon, hoping to seek revenge on him. Instead, they were confronted with his overseer, John Greenwood. All other convict farmhands on the property but Greenwood wanted to join the rebellion when persuaded. Things got heated. Shots were exchanged and Greenwood was fatally shot. This murder changed everything. Until then, the authorities had been pursuing escaped convicts. Now they were hunting killers. The search intensified. Government and local forces spread through the valleys and limestone country south of Bathurst, determined to crush the uprising before it gathered further support. Across the Bathurst district, rumours spread quickly. Some reports claimed the gang numbered 130 men. Others exaggerated their strength to over 500. Whether those figures were accurate hardly mattered. The fear they created was very real. Settlers began abandoning isolated huts after dark, and the colonial government responded by sending mounted police and soldiers into the surrounding countryside. For several days, the rebels moved through rugged country that offered both shelter and concealment. One of their refuges was the Abercrombie Caves. Surrounded by steep ridges, deep gullies and bushlands, it provided a temporary sanctuary as patrols closed in from every direction. Eventually, Government forces caught up with them here at Grove Creek Falls, not far from the caves. A brief but fierce exchange of gunfire echoed across the valley. The rebels scattered. Some escaped into the bush. The 10 core members, including Ralph Entwistle, were captured. Their rebellion had lasted only a matter of weeks. Its end came swiftly. Their trial provided the first sitting of the colony's Supreme Court in Bathurst on 29 October 1830. The evidence against them was overwhelming. 6 found guilty of murder, 4 of theft. Antwistle and 9 other members of the Ribbon Boys were sentenced to death. On the 2nd of November 1830, they were led to the newly erected gallows in the centre of Bathurst. It remains the largest mass execution ever carried out in New South Wales and was intended as a warning to any convict who might consider following the same path. Their bodies were buried in 2 unmarked mass graves in the old cemetery outside the town boundary of Bathurst. No trace of that cemetery, located on the corner of George and Lambert Streets, remain. As Bathurst grew, the cemetery closed and any remaining bodies that could be located were later exhumed and moved to a subsequent cemetery location. Today, people stroll through Bathurst's historic streets, tourists admire its colonial buildings, and few give a second thought to the events that unfolded here almost 200 years ago. Places like Ribbon Gang Lane, where Antwistle and his men were hanged, old newspaper reports, and a handful of surviving locations quietly preserve the memory of those turbulent weeks. History has never offered a simple answer to the question of who Ralph Entwistle really was. Was he a victim of a harsh convict system, a desperate man driven to rebellion, or simply a criminal who chose violence? History offers no easy answers. What is certain is that, for a few extraordinary weeks in 1830, one transported convict challenged the authority of an entire colony. His rebellion was swiftly crushed, but the story of the Ribbon Boys remains one of Australia's most remarkable and largely forgotten convict rebellions.